Good evening, everybody. We'll go ahead and call to order the regular scheduled meeting of the Marin Water Board of Directors for Tuesday, January 25th, 2025. Terry, if I got a roll call, please.
Good evening. Let me do this. Okay. Director Diana Mayer. Here. Director Larry Russell.
Here.
Vice President Jed Smith.
Here.
Director Ranji Kush.
Here.
And President Matt Sampson.
Here. Do we have an echo already?
It's because the TV.
Okay,
is
great.
on.
Thank you. Okay. Do we have any public comment on the adoption of the agenda?
There are none.
I have a motion to adopt the agenda. Please.
So moved.
Second. Roll call.
Director Mayer.
Aye.
Director Russell.
Aye.
Vice President Smith.
Aye.
Director Kush.
Aye.
And President Sampson.
Yes. We'll move on to item number 5, public comment on non-agenda matters.
Yes, I have Phil Sauter. For non.
9A and 9B.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Maria Gisletta. Okay, so you're a no. Okay. Okay, there are none.
Okay, great. We'll go ahead and move on to item number 6, Director and General Manager's announcements. Ben, we'll start with you.
I don't have any this evening, President Sampson.
Great, thank you. Director Mayer.
None for me either. Thanks.
Director Smith.
Yeah, I was able to join the Marin City celebration for Martin Luther King, and it was quite a moving event with leaders from all over the county and several hundred folks from Marin City. And they were super appreciative of what Marin Water has done and is about to do with the pipeline work there. And it was a solemn time, January 20th, but I was proud to represent. And I know there'll be other comments about the board retreat, but I thought that was an outstanding event and well done from the leadership team. And I hope folks that didn't get to be there in person will watch the video. It was a robust, thoughtful conversation. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Director Russell.
No.
Great. Director Kush.
Yeah, also very appreciative to staff for the organization on the board retreat. That was it was a good day. So thank you for that. I also just wanted to note that last week I was asked to provide Marin Water updates at the Kent Woodlands Property Owners Association annual meeting. Kent Woodlands is an unincorporated development just east of Ross, which shares a long boundary with our watershed along Crown Road. So wildfire risks in particular are a concern in this area. And last week, and certainly the news from Southern California was exacerbating the attention related to wildfires. So I want to thank staff again, particularly Sean's group, for putting together a really good summary of our fuel management activities around Kent Woodlands and across the watershed more broadly. It was really helpful for a good discussion.
Great, thank you. And Ben, just to echo what everyone else has said, the work that went into the retreat was really appreciated. I thought it was a very productive day, and I thought it was very worthwhile. And then on the heels of such big work, to turn around and ask staff to deliver on the emergency preparedness wildfire safety piece was a really big lift. And so it goes noticed. So thank you very much for that. In fact, last week I was unable to attend the Tomales Bay Foundation group because I was speaking with Southern Marin Fire and some of the leadership of their councils in the cities and Southern Marin, the areas they serve, to start a preparation for numerous presentations we're moving forward with around community preparedness, wildfire response, and things like that, specifically to the water supply component based on all of the talk that's come out of the Los Angeles basin surrounding these fires. So again, thank you very much to staff. We'll look forward to more robust meetings on this. And then as a reminder, on the February meeting for Tomales Bay, we're going to look to show, I'll look to put together a presentation for some of the work that's being done on the spillway gateways at Nicasio and some of the work that's gone into the rehabilitation for Lagunitas Creek to see how that could affect all the way the downstream to Tomales Bay. So more information to that follow. Great. And with that, we'll move on to item number 7, board and committee reports. Director Russell.
The Operations Committee was held on Friday, January 17th. Staff provided a briefing of the district's wildfire preparedness efforts. The overview was provided in light of the recent Southern California wildfires and covered the district's vegetation management on the watershed and around district facilities, infrastructure hardening work, emergency response planning, and the fire flow program and its involvement with controlling wildfire and fires in general. Staff provided a brief overview of a proposed 2-year professional services agreement with Point Blue Conservation Service to perform northern spotted owl surveying work. The committee referred this item to the board to consider for approval at a future meeting. Staff provided an update on the district's water system master plan and a proposed third amendment to an agreement with Woodard and Curran to expand their scope of services to extend the contract date and expand the scope of services to support our ongoing capital infrastructure planning work for the district. The committee referred this item to the board to consider for approval at a future meeting. Staff provided an update. It was a busy meeting, as you can tell. Staff provided an update to the committee on the RFP selection for print, mail, and payment processing services for the district. Staff are recommending contracting with Paymentus Corporation for this service. The committee referred this item to the board to consider for approval at tonight's meeting. Just to put things in perspective, it's $1 million a year we spend roughly on this issue, and the contract is for something on the order of $4 million. So it's not a insignificant a task. The public may access staff reports and video recording of this January 17th Operations Committee meeting on Marin Water's website.
Great, thank you. Any other directors have any other committee reports this time? Okay, great. We'll move on to item number 8, the consent calendar. We have 3 items in the consent calendar tonight: approving the meeting minutes from our last meeting in January, approving the general manager's report, and then approving the contract Director Russell just referred to from Paymentus Corporation. Do we have any public comment on the consent calendar?
There are none.
Any board members like to pull any items? Excellent. Go ahead and take a roll call vote, please.
I'm sorry, who was the motion and?
Sorry, motion.
So moved.
Sorry,
you.
thank you, Terry.
No worries.
Oh, yeah.
Director Mayor,
Aye.
Director Russell,
Aye.
Vice President Smith.
Aye.
Director Kush,
Aye.
President Sampson.
Aye.
Thank you.
Great. Item number 9, first regular item, an update on our water supply roadmap.
Good evening, Paul Sellier, Water Resources Director, and I'm joined this evening with Xavier Arias, Woodard and Curran, and we'll be doing a roadmap, water supply roadmap update.
That's fine.
What about the projector? That's right there. I got it, Terry. Yeah. Well, now we're through that hurdle. Okay, I'll just move through this as quickly as we can. So our water supply roadmap update, we have a few items that we picked up last week, just questions and comments that we'd like to sort of take care of and tidy up that business before we get into taking a look at the review and evaluation of the projects tonight. And we'll close with next steps. So the items that we picked up last week, a couple weeks ago now, January 7th, time is flying by. We had a request to make sure we included our capital costs as well as sort of dry year costs per acre foot and project comparisons, and sort of on a similar line, trying to keep everything apples and apples as best we can. Make sure our dry year yields were presented in acre foot per year. So thank you for those comments. We've taken those and incorporated those, and you'll see some of that tonight, hopefully. Number 3 here. So there was a comment made about around Nicasio Reservoir spillway, and just a comment around what's happening with the other spillways. And so we just wanted to refresh our memories as to kind of why we're moving forward so quickly with Nicasio in relation to the other spillways. Item 4 were some questions around desalination costs. And so we asked Woodard and Curran to take a deeper look at that. And so we'll have a response to some of that for you this evening. And then some questions around, the challenges implementing projects. How do we get a better handle on project implementation and risk? And then finally, it was sort of, how much water are we looking for? This question around what are our water supply needs? So we're trying to get to the bottom of those things before we get into taking a look at the criteria. So without further ado, the spillway modifications. So as you know, we're moving forward with Nicasio, and the primary reason Nicasio was sort of selected, if you like, as the first spillway mod is quite simply that the reservoir facilities were constructed to accommodate it. So that the dam is high enough, as you can see here in this small table, you can see the freeboard at design flood at Nicasio is still 6.5 feet, whereas the others are kind of creeping up toward the top of the dam. As we learn more about how DSOD is responding to the Nicasio project, we're going to be able to implement that on what we consider trickier projects in terms of getting as much as we can out of them in terms of, Alpine Kent and Sulahuli. So we are going to be pursuing those, and though we do expect the yields for those reservoirs when we look at this to be relatively small.
Paul, in terms of relatively small, is there an estimate on what we were thinking or what the first swab at this is?
I don't have to mind, Xavier. Do you?
Okay, not super pressing. I was just more curious, but when we get there
Hundreds to low.
Yeah, hundreds to 1,000 at most.
per,
Yes.
okay.
Wait,
Thank you.
and Nicasio is 5 feet. We're contemplating increasing the spillway.
So they're looking at different ranges
Okay.
right now. We nominally picked out 3 feet
3 feet. Okay,
as the 3,000 acre foot increase in the reservoir.
thanks.
So then I'm going to pass it over to Xavier to walk us through the desalination review. And there we go.
Thank you. I wanted to start with just a breakdown of what's in the estimate that we're using. And we took the approach of reviewing a prior estimate that's been developed and then updated by 2 other consulting firms over the years. It started with a lot of data that was collected in 2006. And that's important because every desal project, it is unique. It's going to be fitted to the site, to the flow rates, the operational patterns, and to the water quality itself. So all that was studied going back actually even earlier than 2006, but in 2006, there was a major pilot study. So that was when some of these facilities that were initially sized. And then in 2021, there was a review and refresh of that study. And then in 2022, another light review and updating costs just for cost indices. So we looked at all that. And this is the breakdown of the 2022, and I took the 10 MGD option, but there's a 5, a 10, and a 15. And just to understand what we're looking at, you see the major line items like the intake, that refers to a mile-long pipe with some screens, and its job would be to collect the water from the bay. So even though it's the bay, it's called an open ocean intake. So it's about the simplest possible design that could be done, although it looks like it's feasible. So that's why it's in there. So it's, we shouldn't take it as an absolute assurance. It's just with the information we have, that concept looks good. And compared to other ones that were considered and not taken, like, well, what about putting a pipe along the pier, restoring the pier, things like that? They would be more expensive. So this is representing a feasible, reasonable approach. And so that's the kind of thing I'm looking at. Is it reasonable? Are all the assumptions reasonable? Pre-treatment, that's the first thing that you do with the water after it comes in with the pipe. Before you send it into the RO system, you have to treat it. It's essentially a mini treatment plant like you would normally have if you didn't have an RO process. You'd have some kind of solids removal, coagulation. In this case, they actually looked at it in some detail and they said, well, what we actually need, it's cheaper if we build an ultrafiltration or microfiltration plant ahead of the RO compared to a conventional plant. So that kind of analysis was done. And that's the kind of thing we're seeing in the prior studies. That depth of thinking about it is what's the best approach here. So that's what's cooked into the pre-treatment. Then you get to membrane filtration. That's kind of the heart of it when you think desal, what's going on there. And this is different than some projects. This is not brackish water, this is seawater. So we're taking seawater and running it through. They looked at single pass versus basically a 2-pass system. And in 2006, they said, well, it could go either way. Maybe we would do the first pass seawater, and then you take that, and depending on water quality conditions, it may be feasible to not have the second pass. Actually, this estimate assumes that second pass is not needed. So it's an assumption that would be, I think, subject to verification as you go through a more detailed process. So that's a reasonable assumption, but just recognizing where is it, where are the assumptions subject to revision? And I pointed out there's a couple that as you really got into it, sure, it could change, but so far I'm seeing, well, maybe it gets a little bit bigger. If you need a second pass system, it's not as expensive as the first, but it's still an adder. And then chemical feed and storage, relatively a small item in the big scheme of things. Residuals treatment, of course, is significant for a desalination plant. You have to get rid of the brine. And they thought pretty carefully about this too. How do we manage the brine in an environmentally and cost-effectively way? And it turns out CMSA is a good option for that. So I think that was thought through in some level of detail. Post-treatment that's things like adding minerals and disinfectant and so on so that you can integrate it with your existing water sources. And then I think something they didn't have a lot of information about early on is the final element in the list, pipeline to the distribution system. And since that time, it's been studied in quite a bit more detail for other reasons. So I bring some of those insights. And I know that when they looked at this, they thought, well, we want the smallest possible tank, and then we're going to pump this thing into the distribution system. And it seemed reasonable at the time. I think as we really drill into that, we're going to find out, well, we need a little more storage. That's what we found when we looked at it, when we were thinking about, well, what if we brought in additional water, say whether through Ignacio or via the East Bay Mud system. Either way, that analysis was telling us we needed a little more equalization storage. What that means is a tank, and tanks are not that expensive compared to these numbers, but it is a challenging site because it's tight for space and the geotechnical conditions are not good. So it's more expensive than your average tank, you might say. So I don't feel like, when you look at things like contingencies and so on, is 20 million a reasonable number for that? It is, in light of what we know about the site right now and how much storage you might need. So that gets you to the subtotal. I guess the point is, I think there was a lot of thought put into these numbers, and we were able to look at it with the benefit of some of the insights that were not even available to people when they looked at it in 2006. And then you have allowances and when you look at allowances, say for site work, it's a big number, and you can unpack that a little bit, which we did. Some of it is site work, like you might think about. Out of that 41%, I jotted down a few. Only something like 6% of it is conventional site work, like you might think, like literally pushing dirt around and doing curbs and pavements and gates and fences and all those things. A lot of it is as things associated with the site. Some of them big, like you have electrical improvements, you have yard piping, which is major process piping, whether buried or not, that has to go around the site. And of course, a desal plant has a lot of that. There's instrumentation and controls. These are complicated systems. So those are all percents. There's basic sales tax on a lot of these. So those are all in there when you look at allowances. And the term allowance, and I think you sometimes see in an estimate contingency. I tend to use the word allowance because we know it's going to happen. It's a contingency is something that may or may not happen. In the case of an allowance, it's a reasonable estimate of something that is certain to be incurred. That's the point, is you can't build the job without those items. So for that reason, when you look at one of the existing ones, they might use a term like contingency. Allowance, I think, it's a good term. Contractor markup. That's also covering things that we know will happen. The contractor needs to make a profit or they won't bid the work. They legally must have insurance and bonds, and that kind of cost is in there. They have overhead costs. They have what are called general conditions. Those are things the contract requires them to do. Essentially, the overhead of running a project for so many years during construction. So those are all costs that you can use different numbers depending on the project type. And that's why two different estimators might have slight differences in how they allocate these costs. But when I look at it, these are well within norms. And you get to contingency, 30%. And whether that seems big or large, I think you look at how much do we know about the project at this stage? And they used a very good tool. It's one that I think does better than what's called the class 5 estimate. but it's somewhere in between. A class 5 estimate is one where you tend to use a cost curve. And I'm going to show you a cost curve in a minute on desal, but that's where you just look very generally at, well, for projects with, say, a certain size, how much generally does it cost? And you plot those on a curve. That's maybe the simplest level of a cost estimate. But instead, they took some site-specific factors, all the factors I mentioned, difficult site. They also knew where the water was coming, how much it was going to be doing, how much treatment they needed to do. Essentially, they did individual facility sizing so they could do better quantity takeoffs. That's what's cooked into it. Nonetheless, you'll see also when we look at real projects, there's a lot of scatter in the costs. So weighing all that, even though they'd done quantity takeoffs, you see the estimate this was represented as a -30 to +50 estimate, which would be a class 5. And normally, I think what they're getting at, and I think it's hard to argue with, is that at this level of project development, there's a lot we don't know. And I mentioned some of those things that could change as you move forward. I didn't mention all of them. For example, you see a lot of actual functioning desal plants where all the process equipment is just sitting out there outside. Or it could be under a canopy, or it could be in a building. Well, what kind of building? Those are all variables. But consider the environment that you're putting the facilities in. If you think about, well, where could a cost like that go in the spectrum of nothing to a very nice building or something in between? Those are all unknowns, and they should be considered as part of the contingency. So I wouldn't be trying to, I guess, wish the contingency down. 30% seems reasonable. It's not the upper bound of 50%, but considering how much we don't know, it's a good number. And then you get to, we're almost done here, all those engineering multipliers, and that sounds like a lot. And as an engineer, of course, it's not like I'm saying, well, they should be huge. It's just, then you look at them, well, let's a piece at a time. Are they reasonable? There's something beyond just engineering cooked in there. There's permitting as well. Permitting a desal project, I think everyone knows, is notoriously challenging. And I don't think that your site would be a slam dunk for permitting, and we should say, well, it's going to be a lot less than industry average. So it's only 3%. That's the number in there for permitting. Then you have engineering. I think it's the design is about 11.5%. Construction services add up to, as I recall, it's 13.5%. Remember, this is exotic equipment. Some of it is, actually a lot of it is manufactured elsewhere, and you have witnessed factory testing. So it's a very elaborate process to make sure you're getting the equipment that you paid for. And then there's a commissioning process that has to be accounted for. So these are not simple, just turn the key kind of startups. And so if it were a straightforward project, those numbers still wouldn't seem crazy high, but knowing the complexity of the system, they seem reasonable to me. So that's what you get when you do all that. Then you're at 454. And even though we've generally had high inflation, it turns out when they priced it was right near the top of the ENR CCI index. So we actually de-escalated it for the numbers that we showed you in early December. We actually had priced it using, you can see, de-escalation of about 7 million. So the price went down after it went up, you might say. And if we quote you another price a year from now, of course it'll be different. So the fact that the number changes, it's a fact that all these prices are subject to change as prices change. So in short, our review of all the details, all of the studies that have been done over the years, and the basis for the estimate, the methodology used for the estimate, they all seem quite appropriate, in short. We did look at it a whole other way, but I'll pause if there's a question on this slide.
Questions on the slide?
Xavier, is there any vulnerability at this site to sea level rise that should be included in the costs?
Well, that's a great question, considering where the project is being built. I think that's the sort of thing that at this stage, before we've poured the first yard of concrete, is easy to deal with, fortunately.
Okay.
If it were an existing facility, we'd be thinking more about it. But yeah, let's say we raise it by a couple of feet. We're talking about piles supported everything out there. So if you have to make the pile, 1 foot taller, it's not a big deal.
I was at the Ashkelon plant in Tel Aviv, and what they did there was pretty interesting. They went to vertical, and it has its drawbacks, but it's very footprint efficient. So the tallest RO is probably 10 meters off the ground. And when they get a leak, it's hard to know where it's leaking from because it drains down off all the other guys. But it is cost effective. Not the easiest for maintenance, but it does work in terms of the controlling the building and the stacking. And they did in-house enclose the thing in a building. So I think there's potential there to do some savings. And of course, the part that's not here is the cost per gallon, which is a whole nother critter. But thank you. I think you,
Sure.
I wondered what that de-escalation term was. I was curious about that, but I wasn't able to put my finger on what it was because I've never seen it before.
Well, we were using ENR CCI Bay Area, and it just happened. If you take those
Sure.
numbers, that's what happens.
Any sense of how these numbers or why they're different from previous ones we've looked at with the Jacob study and the summer? Is there a comparison that you can share with us, or maybe just off the cuff?
I think in fact, we're talking
They
about
seem to keep going up.
They do. And remember that the pricing that I showed you here at 454, that was actually the same fundamental project description. But it was just escalated and some fine tuning on sizes, but generally not saying let's round up. It was, if anything, let's take advantage of what we know and try to optimize the project. So what you're seeing mostly is from the original 2006 study to 2022, significant escalation in construction cost.
Director Mayor.
Well, and Jacobs was like less than this significantly as well. And that was just last year that we looked at it. So I think it was like,
332.
yeah, it was like over 100 million less just a year ago. So I'm just trying to understand, in a year, is it going to be 100 million more? Or it's so hard for me to understand
I think
how these numbers are shifting so much in such a short period of time.
The number I'm quoting is actually it's the same kind of wave. This is the strategic water supply assessment that I'm showing you on the screen here. I think that where it can be confusing is, are you talking about with or without contingency? This is a fully loaded cost with contingency.
That's why I was trying to understand what changed. So we can
think
follow up later.
I think
Yeah.
this is the out the door price I'm quoting you. That's the difference.
We can follow up.
Okay.
Is it true that in the strategic water supply assessment by Jacobs, there were also pricing on 3 different options, 5, 10, and 15? Is that correct?
That's correct.
Which also can be confusing.
Yes.
I mean, I know we're getting into O&M coming forward on this. Or are we looking at that? But the O&M pricing went up 70% since the summer, I think. So I'm just trying to understand what has changed. That's all from your analysis.
Okay. We have one more slide on the capital unless there are other questions.
Can you clarify for me that this is the cost to get the plant up and going, but not like the membrane filtration? I'm assuming that would be every year. Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
When you say that cost on this.
Yeah,
screen,
what-
These are one-time capital costs.
Okay.
To construct the facility.
Okay.
And then there would be.
It's a filter. A permanent installed filter.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead and
Okay. So we looked at it a whole other way, which is instead of looking at it bottom up, I showed you all the components, very site specific. This would just be, how about as a sanity check? Let's just look at what other desal projects cost. And there's a lot of factors that are not captured by a simple capacity, but let's just throw the data up there and see what it says. So the orange dots are the 5, 10, and 15 MGD options for Marin. They're not part of the curve fitting. So the curve, it's actually a curve. It looks like a line, but that reflects, I think it's 12 other projects. And to get that data set, we had a few in the US, so they're all called out by name there. So if you were weighting it, which we didn't do for this, we just plotted it, took it straight, but you'd say, well, the more recent it is, and the more representative it is of our set of regulatory and treatment requirements and so on, the better it would be. So a recent California project is worth more than, say, an Australian project that's from 2006, but they're all up there. And you can see, I think one thing that kind of jumps out at you is how it's not like it's a super tight fit along the line, because there's a lot more going on than just nameplate capacity on the plant. Nonetheless, especially in the size range we're talking about, you see 5, 10, and 15, and they're not plotting far from the line. In fact, the 15 is on the line and the 10 is close to the line. So if you look at it as sort of a sanity check, is it consistent with the actual or estimated cost? I'd say yes. This is telling us we're not way off. Any questions on that?
Savi, the Monterey, that's maybe one of the more recent ones, right? That's down in Seaside, I think. So that's a good, and it's also looks like it's in that 5 MGD
It is.
size. And so that's pretty good comparator in terms of geography and timing. And
Yes.
as you're saying, we're generally aligned with that.
So that's kind of where we are on, this is all capital cost. And I know another discussion could be had on operating costs. And although I guess a quick thought on operating costs is that electricity is at one of your big inputs. And in California, particularly, that pricing has just gone through the roof in the last several years. So that it's not like we're now assuming it will use more energy. No, it's just that the energy costs more. A kilowatt hour costs a lot more than it used to.
Yeah, from 2006, for example, at 12 cents a kilowatt hour, now we're at 47 cents a kilowatt hour.
Paul, any color on why the operations and maintenance pricing went up 60, 70% since the summer?
Yeah, I
Like
guess
what changed?
as we're talking about power, so these costs have been, Jacobs provided us sort of a lump sum cost with not a great deal of breakdown. And we know desal requires a lot of energy in order to produce water. So we wanted to be able to break out a factor of that O&M as power. And so Xavier took a look at that and did just that. And so we've been able to kind of rate the effect of power increase, the cost of power on the O&M cost for desal. So I think that plays a large role in any cost increases. Okay. So then moving to implementation challenges, how do we get a handle on, are we going to spend hundreds of millions of dollars and not end up with a project? Is there a good way for us to kind of get a handle on that? And I know we've talked in the past about permits, and there was a request, and is this a good sort of surrogate, if you like, for that concept of project risk, if you like? And we're calling it this project implementation challenge. So what are the external permitting agencies here? And just at a quick glance, you can look at, water efficiency has no permits required. We're the authority over that. We can do it right away, and we are. In contrast with desal, IPR, and DPR, not surprisingly, there are a lot of ticks and along the agencies there. And then similarly, storage has quite a few as well. Just reflecting that the more complex projects have a lot of permits associated with them. And while these don't give us an idea of how difficult it might be to get each of these permits, you can sort of thinking about something like desal, you're going to get sort of a double whammy, right? On the intakes, you're going to get concerns over the environment on impingement and entrainment issues, as well as just covering the Bay Area with an intake. And they're going to have to be big because you need to keep velocities low. So, and just what we know about now, desal in California there are not many open intake plants, or any maybe, that have been permitted. They're all, the ones, the successful ones have used either existing intakes or some kind of beach well. So while the Coastal Commission doesn't operate in the bay, we have the BCDC kind of equivalent. So we might expect some issues around, real challenges around an intake just for the desal plant. So that's hurdle number one on desal, and a very, very difficult one. And
Paul, sorry, what is BCDC?
sorry, the
stand for?
Bay Conservation and Development Commission.
And Paul, when you say existing intake, is
So
that,
like
has,
an old power plant that had a cooling water intake.
have recent projects in the Bay Area been able to tap into those?
Not in the Bay Area, excuse me, that was California. So the last one I'm aware of was Carlsbad.
Okay.
Was using an old intake. So they, they kind of get a free structure. There's no, compared to our costs, right?
And
Well, they were supposed to get more than
And-
that though,
and-
because it was co-located with the power plant.
Right.
And they were anticipating getting warmer water, which takes substantially less power
Right.
to pressurize. So there was a dual effort there, and then
Yeah.
Edison closed, or Southern Cal, San Diego Power
Yeah.
closed the power plant.
Yeah, and then there's a big desal in Tampa that's co-located with a power facility. They get a twofer. They get the use of the intakes and inside the fence power rates, which we're not going to be able to do, obviously, here in Marin. So
Also, the brine disposal went
this
out.
is where I
really
was just going. You were
outfall.
exactly right, Director Russell. We were talking, challenges on the intake. We've got challenges getting rid of the brine as well. And as you know, desal for the bay is a sort of a 2-for-1. If you want to produce 10 MGD, you got to bring in 20 MGD. So you're getting rid of 10 MGD of brine that's now twice as salty as the bay water. So you need to dilute it, hence the CMSA, use of CMSA water to dilute that brine so that it goes back out into the bay at approximately sort of a neutral buoyancy and salinity. So that's just two quick examples of the difference for permitting for a desal plant compared to, something like a conveyance project where your permit considerations might be, crossing a small stream. You're going to need a Army Corps permit and a Fish and Wildlife permit, but those may be relatively straightforward compared to, desal type permits. So this chart is just an indicator, and I think the take home is the number of ticks corresponds to the complexity and challenges and risk associated with the project. It doesn't, I would say, address, non-permitting agency stakeholders, which can affect project outcomes as well.
Also known as the voters in Marin County approving a desal.
Ballot measure, for example. Yeah. Okay. And then our sort of, I think this is our last to do before we get on with the evening's presentation. And this is around looking at how much water do we need. And I thought this was a slide that you may have recall from the Strategic Water Supply Assessment. It's certainly well used, but it's really very effective at understanding that we don't, as much as we can try to forecast, there are things that can occur that are going to make those forecasts wrong.
Well, I always get confused. On the y-axis, we're looking at current water supply. So we have time,
Yes.
and then on the others, that's water supply.
I don't know that there's necessarily a water supply component, but you could think of it that way. I mean, it's really uncertainty if you wanted to think about it. Right? So we're at a point in time, and we can fix that point in time today, but there are things that we're going to get wrong. Forecasting demand, not a trivial exercise over 50 years or 20 years or 10 years even. If we look back 10 years and tried to predict where we are today, we'd probably have gotten the number wrong. In fact, every other urban water management plan forecast is wrong. It's just the nature of the forecasts that we do. So there are things that are going to happen that are going to change what we see as we need today. To try to capture this range of uncertainties, you try to plan so that your plans can address this range of uncertainties. So the way they did that in the Strategic Water Supply Assessment was to look at these scenarios. So scenario 1 through 4, and they're just different hydrologies, if you want to think of them that way. And what was controlling for us was scenario 2, was this short-term severe drought. In fact, it's a drought we've never seen in the record. It's 1976 followed by 77, followed by 2020 and 2021. It's like the 4 lowest years the district's ever seen. It hasn't presented itself even in a paleo record. So we know it's a severe drought, and so it was no surprise that that was our controlling drought as we move forward. What that report, Strategic Water Supply Assessment, said was that as a result of scenario 2, and we would, and a whole host of other assumptions and forecasts around demand and other things, that we would need around 8,500 acre feet per year of dry year water.
And Paul, just various combinations of all of those other assumptions were then modeled to come up with the 8,500. So
Yes.
you're looking at every range of different combinations of different assumptions going forward.
We looked certainly at all the years of hydrology that we had, and even creating synthetic hydrologies to try to understand what our susceptibility to things we hadn't seen would be. So with 8,500 acre feet as the target established by the Strategic Water Supply Assessment, we also know that one of the assumptions in that assessment was that we were going to use 2020 demands, potable water demands from our customers. 2020 was a high water use year for us. In fact, if you can see the chart lines here, the blue line is where we actually have been. So you can, it's showing that we're somewhere around 22,000 acre feet right now. And the yellow line was what the Strategic Water Supply Assessment said our demand would be. And it's about
You have a mouse to help?
it's about a 4,000 acre foot difference. So here's the blue line, the end of the mouse, and the yellow line up here is about 4,000 acre foot difference between those 2 points. So again, back to my other comments about reflecting how difficult it is to forecast demand going forward. We think it's a conservative estimate to suggest that we take advantage of this, but not all 4,000 acre feet. So we think 2,000 acre feet are about half of what we're seeing today. So right off the top, thanks to water efficiency and our customers, we can reduce the 8,500 down to the 6,500 acre feet. So if there are no questions on that. So then how do we think about the work in progress that the board's already commissioned, and where is that going to be taking us, and what are we really left with in terms of our decisions that we need to try to make in the next few weeks? So looking at this rubric, this sort of block here, we've got the 8,500 acre foot goal from Strategic Water Supply Assessment. The green block is the 2,000 acre feet per year from reduced demand. We got the Nicasio spillway. If that's going to come through at 3,000 acre feet, right, on a 4-year drought, that's worth 750 acre feet per year. We've got in-system improvements that we know we can do. And we recognize that some of these numbers may be higher, they may be lower, right? So we're trying to take a somewhat conservative approach to these numbers to give you a real feel for where we think we are. So with these reductions in demand, we're looking at about a need for 4,750 acre feet per year. So then just reminding us all, these are the projects that we've looked at. Everything from water efficiency, purple pipe recycling projects, direct potable, indirect potable reuse, different sizes of desalination. We've looked at spillways, we've looked at raising local reservoirs, and of course, we've looked at conveyance. So as we think about—
Thank you for that chart. That was great. I appreciate you articulating it in that way. Okay. Yeah, thanks for responding.
So then the criteria that we went through in some detail last time, I'm going to breeze through these next 2 slides. They haven't changed, it's the same 7 criteria as before. And then, the information that might be responsive to the criteria is also the same. So reliability is how much water are we looking at? In terms of flexibility and resiliency, does it integrate well with our existing infrastructure? Does it give us flexibility over future climate change? How does it respond in those sorts of situations? Schedule and implementation is really an important factor how long is it going to take us to build this project if we decide to move forward? And, how much does it cost? What's the first phase? And with phase comes risk, right? If you build a huge capacity project and it turns out you didn't need it, that's not great. But if you built a smaller project that had a phasable approach to it and you found out, well, gee, we actually are using all of the first phase, maybe it'd be a good idea to build the next phase. So there's some benefits in that respect. And of course, construction risk. And we'll talk about that a little bit with respect to Kent Reservoir later. Water quality differences primarily related to source water, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And environmental stewardship, how do these projects affect, various resource areas? And then, of course, social stewardship. And last but not least is economic and financial. So those are our criteria. So getting to kind of the summary on this, the left here, we have the categories of project, the recycled water, purple pipe, IPR and DPR recycled water, then desalination, local storage, and conveyance. And across the top, we have our criteria from reliability and sustainability, flexibility and resilience, all the way out to economic and financial. And the team has taken a look at the project categories, and we've attempted to give an easy way of looking at whether one category performs better in relative to others in a particular category. The darker green reflects a better performing alternative. The lightest color, which is actually green in another world on another computer, but our screen here changes our colors a little bit. But anyway, I think it's enough we can see the differences. Okay, so now we're going to, like last time, break these out into the individual criteria. So we're going to go column by column. So starting with reliability and sustainability, we have our sort of rubric here on the top right, helping us to remember what we're thinking about in terms of this criteria. And then since this is about water supply, we've got the 4,750 acre feet there. That's what we're kind of looking for. So you can see, just casting our eye on at this, the desal stands out. It's the highest capacity. It's excellent availability in terms of drought supply, and it has easily the highest capacity. So it's the clear winner in this criteria. Though I would say, storage, DPR, and the conveyance also are capable at full build out of producing significant volumes of water for us as well. So then flexibility and resilience. So again, the rubric up here says we're really looking for something that increases flexibility for operations. It improves the resilience of our system, integrates into ours and regional systems, and then minimizes our operational complexity to the extent we can. And as we look at this, it seems like local storage and conveyance fit the bill. When we look at desal, again, it's not the lowest scoring option here. It's in the middle range, in the medium range, but we do have to run those plants even when the reservoirs would be spilling, and so we don't really have an option to turn them off. So in that sense, it's reducing our operational flexibility. If we switch for a moment and think about one of the pipeline projects, the conveyance projects, there's a real flexibility to just having water sitting there waiting for you to be able to use it in terms of storage. In terms of conveyance, a conveyance project would have synergy with a future storage project. And what I mean by that is, if you think about, for example, Kent Reservoir, were we to attempt to raise Kent, we'd have to empty it. Now, Kent's our largest supply of water. It's 32,000 acre feet. We'd be fully half without that water for potentially up to a year or more. So how could we de-risk that emptying Kent? If we had access to a supply of water through a conveyance project, it could certainly offset the potable use from Kent. Most years, we're only using around 5,000 acre feet of water for potable uses from Kent. There are still other risks that we need to manage in terms of environmental releases and things like that, but it gets us, answers a question for us in terms of water supply for our customers.
Oh, one point on that. related to conveyance that would give us the ability to bring winter water down. Do you envision scenarios where we might reduce our imports of Sonoma water in the summer when there's the highest demand on those resources, rely more on our reservoirs, and then use winter water to refill reservoirs that are, below where we would normally take them in the absence of improved conveyance?
It would certainly give us that option. I think in the situation where we typically find ourselves in drought conditions, we may have flow restrictions imposed in the summertime from Sonoma. And so we would be very glad. if it-
Which happened in 21.
Which did happen in 21, yeah. Okay, so schedule and implementation, I think we're all feeling the need to move and get something going in terms of addressing our water supply. And I know it's a long time and a lot of work has gone into it. Still, schedule and implementation for a project, some of these projects can be decades. So as we look at them, it just categorizing briefly, it looks like the pipeline projects, right? The purple pipe projects and the conveyance projects, not surprisingly, have the shortest time frame for implementation. So those are scoring the highest in this particular area. I would call out Upper Nicasio, as the board recalls, that was a sort of third reservoir that we carried through for some evaluation. It's slight. We think it's slightly better in respect of implementation time frame than the other two reservoirs. I wouldn't say it transforms it into a fantastic project, but in this particular criteria, it's going to perform a little bit better than Kent or Silihuly. And in terms of water quality, we really see recycled water, IPR and DPR, along with desalination, just getting a sort of a slight ding here. And that's just in terms of that source water quality and the perception that might be generated as having a different quality water out in the distribution system. And this would, depending on the size of the desal plant, for example, if it was 5 MGD, it would be fairly locally consumed. So it would present those differences within our service area. Perception of differences in our service area. The water would, of course, meet all the necessary standards and be safe, but there is still a perception around these.
Paul, just on schedule and implementation, can you remind us about the constructability challenges for expanding Kent?
Yeah, so for me, it starts with, ideally, you would raise Kent by building up on the downstream side, and then you wouldn't have to empty it. Doing it that way presents technical engineering challenges. So the experts from Terra have just told us that it's better if we were to do an upstream raise of Kent. When we're looking at an upstream raise of Kent, the reservoir needs to be emptied, which, yeah, pull the plug and empty it, but it's not quite that simple because we've got a really important fishery below that reservoir. So we've got to figure out a way to remove 32,000 acre feet of water from the reservoir to get it ready for an August 1st construction start. So 16 months prior, we need to start releasing water and kind of matching stream flows in the winter to try to get as much water out of the reservoir, because don't forget, water's coming in all the while you're releasing it. It can be significant depending on the year type. So we've looked at this and we've come up with a way that we think we could probably empty the reservoir. It's challenging because you just don't know what kind of year you're going to have. So having emptied the reservoir on August 1st, the construction crews would start going gangbusters. There'd be other work that might have been done leading up to August 1st, but it would be quite limited. So August 1st, from then on out, you're basically digging the first 10 or 15 feet of earth off the base of the reservoir to try to get to good material. And then they start adding material as quickly as they can, compacting, and I'm greatly simplifying the process. But a lot of earthwork is happening as quickly as possible. And that earthwork needs to be done, but similar to Pine Mountain Tunnel between August 1st and February 1st, because there are a lot of owls in the area. So we have this constrained window. But you can imagine operations going 20 hours a day, 2 10-hour shifts with a 4-hour shift for maintenance and fueling of equipment, lights. I mean, it would be a production out there. So the challenges for us are an empty reservoir and a risk that it's not going to be able to be refilled and reused, next February. In fact, next February, we'd only, in the best of all scenarios, you'd only be able to fill it up a little bit. So it's not like you'd be getting, and then you've got to deal with the water that comes in during that following winter and get everything back down again to a level that they can then start work on again. So really, it's just a series of challenges. And I don't know, Xavier, if you want to weigh in, if I've missed anything.
I think you covered it, but the shortened construction season is to do with the owl. I think when you think about these risks during construction, they're, of course, if you knew about all of them, you might not even say they're risks, but having worked on so many large projects, you find something like a geologic feature that needs to be investigated more, and that's a delay. Or or on the environmental side, you find more resources than you had anticipated, because you're never going to get a closer look than when you're out there doing a project. Those are all things that have happened on projects, and they represent delay. They're usually manageable. But when you already have you're taking the heart of your system, which is Kent, and taking it offline for a period of time, I think that the key thing here is there's a risk that the outage of Kent turns out to be longer than you wanted. It's not just a surgical several months. It could turn into a few years before you know it. And I think if there's a way to, as Paul said, de-risk that, it would be of huge value to make Kent reasonably constructible.
When the Contra Costa Water District board members were here for the Aqua tour, they said that was for them what killed the deal on Los Vaqueros. They could not risk the period during which it would be emptied. Now, I don't know if that's actually the case, but that's what they claimed. Yeah.
Which is kind of interesting because they, of course, did without Los Vaqueros for most of my professional career. There was no Los Vaqueros. So it's kind of interesting that all of a sudden it's so critical to their thinking.
It could have been something else, right? But yeah, that's what they said.
So I think we ran water quality to ground, unless there were any questions on the differences there. So then in terms of the environment, again, our rubric helps us. How well does the project meet our commitment to the environment? And what are the extent of impacts that each of these projects might have? And again, not surprisingly, the pipeline projects, just to broadly categorize them, Purple Pipe and the conveyance projects, the impacts are temporary. They're during construction. Now, if you've got to drive, in a downtown area and there's a big pipeline, it's painful. We've all been through those sorts of traffic snarls, but the best thing that you can do is to get through there as quickly as you can when you're constructing it. So these are temporary impacts and no significant long-term impacts for pipeline projects. In contrast, we've got, desalination with significant ongoing energy consumption. We talked about the brine. We talked about the intake. And then for the local storage projects, I think the board's well aware of the potential for environmental impacts associated with raising dams, excuse me. So then in terms of social stewardship, again, how well does the project meet our commitment to social stewardship, and to what extent are we disrupting existing uses when we go out and sort of put in one of these projects? Again, the pipeline projects with their temporary impacts are relatively friendly to this criteria. And I think, IPR, DPR, desalination, again, related to that perception of water quality, you may get this inequity in consumption of water.
Paul, that is just based on the distribution potential from the current concepts there.
Yeah.
So the actual distribution wouldn't go far from the actual plant itself.
Again, the larger the plant, the further it would be spread. And depending on the time of year, as you know, the district's wintertime demand, if you were producing, I mean, you wouldn't have a desal plant operating at 15 MGD, but if you did, you could serve almost all of the district's demand that way. We'd need to put in some infrastructure to move that water to different parts of the system, but it could be done.
And then the same for the recycled water then as well.
Yeah.
Great.
Probably a nuclear power plant.
So I know you haven't had enough numbers tonight. We've got a few more here, but this really, I hope, addresses some of the comments about, making sure we're sort of disclosing what we need to, so you can look at a project and just get a feel for, okay, that's the capital. How much is it going to cost us? What's the unit cost, all in one place? So I think and we've a little bit different, we've looked at all of these individually now. So these what we've been looking at are not the categories anymore. We've been looking at the individual projects. And one of them really does stand out, and you can see the Petaluma 3 or PETA 3 option for conveyance down there. And it comes down to, the fact that this project can be phased, so we can add to it and increase the capacity of the project over time. And it's within our means at the moment. It doesn't require any additional rates or bonding. So it's not to say it's the only project. Certainly the other two conveyance projects are scoring in the medium, as is local storage for Kent and Sewell-Hooley, both of which we can't really separate, as I mentioned last time, with the work that we've done at this point. They're neck and neck in terms of a storage project, raising a dam. And then, of course, Peacock Gap stands out among the Purple Pipe projects.
Paul, can you remind us what we get with between phases A and B for PETA 3?
Yeah, so in terms of volume,
Or I'm guessing it's I remember it's the extent of the pipeline. Right?
oh, yes. So sorry. So phase A goes essentially along from the freeway. We connect to the North Marin Aqueduct and we run along, what's the road? San Marin Drive there, all the way out past Stafford and probably go to Nicasio initially. So it'd be one pump station. And we'd probably, maybe in the first phase of the project, we might buy the land for a future second pump station to kind of make sure we've got that phase B kind of in our pocket, and it's really easy to move forward with. So that's what we get. And of course, it's about 3,800 acre feet of water.
And then phase B.
Phase B would then expand the capacity of that pipeline by adding a second pump station. And I think we've got some piping improvements.
Piping improvements along the existing aqueduct, paralleling Highway 101.
Yes.
And so those two alone account for the big jump in cost all the way up. Because phase B shows 405 million
That's the total project cost?
for A and B.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Hey, Paul, I was fortunate to bump into Andrew McCullough, who's the general counsel at Peacock, and I guess they haven't heard from us about our interest in exploring this. I would like to say that they remain interested in talking to us about this, and it's hard to make a decision without knowing what all the options are for government, NGO, private support for projects like this, but that's one that has clear interest that would reduce these costs, I believe.
Okay, good to know.
All the more, it'd be good for us to start taking things off this list so that we can really focus on areas. And the fact that we haven't even talked to them yet means you're really busy. So let's help get you some focus. And this might be one.
Okay.
I didn't understand your comment that 168 million wouldn't require bonding.
Right. Oh, yeah. Sorry, I meant rates.
Well, you said bonding and rates.
Right. So in the current rate structure, the 4-year that we're currently in, we have sufficient reserves, and then moving the study money over that would address a debt service for the bonds that we would issue for example, for PETA 3. So
Oh,
there would
that's a
not
better way of
be,
phrasing it. I see what you're
there
saying.
would not be a additional rate adjustment to
Pay for them.
move ahead with that project.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's
A couple of more things. You may recall when I came back from Toronto at the IWA meeting, a group presented from LA who said that in their opinion, there would never be another desal plant built in California because of the permitting issues of getting rid of the brine. And I'm sure you remember the previous effort at this, about the time I joined the board. URS was retained to evaluate the brine disposal, mixing it in with the CSMA effluent. And they did 5,000 computer simulations of that evaluation. You made it kind of simple that you balance out the salinity and it rises to a certain point and stops. Maybe, that's a pretty tricky issue because clearly they felt it was justified to run 5,000 runs to make it the decision. It's a handful of issues with respect to brine disposal. I personally don't believe it's that big of a deal, but I think that the perception is it's a very big deal. And, I hark back to our friends down south. Cargill has a bittern disposal that is the salts that won't evaporate after you concentrate salt water. And it finds its own way out on the bottom of the bay in its own channel that it cut. It's running today. It's running every day. It's a dark brown Coca-Cola type material. And that's been going on for 100 years. And I'm sure it's very hard on the invertebrates, especially that live in that area. But obviously there's a lot of bay bottom to live in. They don't have to live in that channel.
Yeah.
So, like I say, I find it kind of interesting, the mix there of allowing one thing to go, but then complaining about another one that involves salt.
Yeah, no, I don't mean to downplay the technical challenges disposing brine. That is for sure. In fact, as the desal program, we ended up writing a paper on that particular topic. So there's a lot of things that go into it.
And supporting Jed's comment, I think he's right on that we got to get some clarity off this list.
Yeah.
Get this thing chopped down. There's time to make decisions.
Should we see the next slide?
We're moving to the next slide. Thank you, President Sampson. So we've been through the criteria a couple times now. This time with the helpful green colors, hopefully we can quickly see what's rising to the top. But I think, Director Smith, you mentioned Purple Pipe Project, Peacock Gap, and interest locally, and I think that's great. And we should and will explore that, and we have in the past, and we'll take another crack at it for sure. But I think we've also, when we're looking for 4,750 acre feet of water, and we look at our Purple Pipe projects, the yield from those projects really isn't helping us move that needle and covering that 4,700 acre feet of water that we're looking for. And then as I think about recycled water and the IPR and DPR, it just feels like those projects were not quite the right agency fit for those projects. So I think if the board would allow, and we'll go through a couple of these other categories at this point, but to the comments we've heard this evening about whittling down the list, I think those two categories, the Purple Pipe and the IPR, DPR, can probably come off our decision-making list tonight. And we'll see that maybe in another slide or two.
With the caveat, especially with the Purple Pipe and in particular Peacock Gap, is that it's not falling off the list of things. It's just for this effort, it doesn't meet the qualifications. It still should be something that should be evaluated, looked into. We should try to push hard for it. But for this decision-making purpose, we need to look at the bigger picture for total acres.
Well put. So then that if we were to do that, that takes us to desalination, the category desalination, local storage, and conveyance as sort of the three big categories that are left. And if we take it a step further and look at the projects that we think maybe are the leaders in each of those categories. And we talked a little bit about this on the 7th. And we think with desalination, the 10 MGD plant is kind of the sweet spot. It's not burdened by the huge capital and O&M of a 15 MGD plant. And yet it has sort of an economy, a unit cost that's better than the 5 MGD plant. So a 10 MGD plant, excellent source reliability. It's really, it's the best drought, resiliency project that you could build. So that's why that one's on the list. Local storage at Kent, as we look at that between Sulahuly and Kent, the differences there in terms of operational risk to the district to construct something like Kent. I don't want to minimize the environmental challenges. We've got to somehow keep a stream release going for coho salmon during this construction period. That's not a trivial matter at all, but maybe we can take a pipe from Alpine and use Alpine water to help feed that creek and keep the fish going. So there may be ways for us to move Kent forward on an environmental basis. And then as Xavier has pointed out, if we were to construct a conveyance project, that would certainly de-risk Kent by some margin.
What is the maximum rate of replenishment, inflow rate from the watershed to Kent? If you happen to know.
I don't have that at the top of my head. I'll try to dig that up for you. Yeah.
The maximum is enormous, isn't it?
It's huge. Yeah. It is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I gathered that when you said you could refill it by February.
Yeah. And then looking at Sulahuly, we know this is inundation of active farmlands and families and those sorts of social impacts out there. Sulahuly is eminently constructible, as I think we've mentioned in the past. So that's why that's still on the list. And then of the conveyance projects, the PETA 3 project is kind of highly feasible. It's the lowest initial capital cost, and it gets us the water supply that we're looking for. As you can see, just from looking at the green, and I don't want to belabor this because the point of tonight, this is just an information session for us. And so to hear your discussion and thoughts on what we're presenting here tonight, and then to think about it between now and the next time we meet. So it does look like it's hitting pretty much all of the categories that we need it to in terms of flexibility, schedule and implementation. It's maybe 4, possibly 5-year construction period. In terms of water quality, it's the same water that we receive from Sonoma now. Environmentally, it's temporary construction impacts as we build this pipeline. Social stewardship, we've got to get through a conservation easement to get to the reservoir, but again, it's not going to be a permanent disruption to that conservation easement. And then economic and financial, we've talked a little bit about that as well this evening. So it's scoring very well in all of the categories that we see. I'll just pause if there are any questions on this approach to narrowing down, which I think we heard a couple of requests on.
We should take questions now before next steps.
We could finish. Yeah. So the next step's very short. It's basically, interested in your discussion, and we'll be back in February.
Great. Paul, Xavier, thank you very much for this and for the effort. The really thoughtful look, one, to take board comments and requests back to get a better clarification on price structure for dry years. That's very helpful. Thank you. And for starting to make a move for what I think we're all starting to feel is the need to narrow down and get to a decision here pretty quickly. So thank you for the presentation. Go ahead and start with board comments. Director Mayer.
Yeah, thank you so much for this. Really thorough, and I've come to understand in the last week or so how much has been done behind the scenes. It's not even represented on these charts to make this a really thoughtful decision. I visited the Kent Reservoir a few weeks ago, and then I went to Sulahuly this weekend, and it had a big impact on me. I always was quite concerned about the idea of Sulahuly, given that we've already asked these folks to take a hit for the team, so to speak, in the late 70s and not really use that water. Now we're talking about inundating their homes, their lands, and with a lot of big questions about permitting. There's so many important species there. Mitigations, really high mitigation costs probably. So I just want to, say that I personally have big concerns about that and concerns for what kind of a conflict that could create that might take many, many years to get over if we were to go that route. So I know we have a lot of problems with all of our routes, but I am particularly concerned with that one. I would just say, and conveyance, I know there are a lot of people who would be concerned about getting water from Sonoma, but again, I think it's just if all things were equal, we might not get the water from Sonoma, but all things aren't equal. And this is, I think we're talking about the least bad option. So I think everything you've said tonight makes a lot of sense to me. Thanks.
Director Smith.
Yeah, we can wait a couple of weeks, but I give guidance as well that I'm comfortable taking the Suluhuli and the Kent Major dam raises off the table. I'm comfortable with continuing to explore desalination. I think there are some things that we can do. It's going to be a slower project, I believe. So I would not take it off. I wouldn't take anything off, but in terms of focus in the short term. I believe that the conveyance has both regional and local impact, and I think there's a lot that we can do there. And if you add the conveyance acre feet per year that would provide for us with other smaller projects from potentially recycled efforts that are on our list with the water efficiency programs that we have, which I think are great. And I appreciate your understanding of our ability to potentially, use less demand or focus on less demand than we have projected. So that could help us out. I mean, my figures get us close to 10,000 acre feet. So this is not insignificant. I mean, I think some people may react to us taking some of these major projects off, but we're talking about investing $200 million into major water resiliency efforts for our county and for our constituents. And that, from the numbers that I see, will get us close to 10,000 acre feet, which is a massive shift in how we're able to support our community, both for potable water as well as wildfire risk. So I'm comfortable with the direction that you're going and look forward to the next steps.
Director Kush.
Yeah, thanks, Paul and Xavier. I think the presentation tonight was probably the clearest representation of all of the different parameters we're trying to evaluate. And it's very hard for me to argue against the green colors on the last slide, which, as others have noted, really do point towards conveyance via PETA 3 as the most promising option to focus on as, the next big effort. I think I wanted to also note this, the concept of regional impacts. I think going forward, so many of the issues we're going to be facing in Marin, whether it's transportation, whether it's sea level rise, to some degree fire risk management, are going to require close cooperation with our neighbors. I think the days when Marin could go it alone on most of these big issues are gone. Now, I don't know that everyone will see the development of additional conveyance as supporting water resource development and resiliency up in the north. But if in fact this does allow us to use more water in the winter and less in the stressful summers, I think that provides benefits for all of us. I hope that's something that we can explore further and potentially, convey as one of the messages as we move forward. Yeah, so I think I had one more thought that I forgot, but it does look very encouraging, and I would recommend that we move quickly to a decision that is informed by this analysis and all the different green colors. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Director Russell.
A couple of things. Do you think that the PETA 3 routing is a superior routing to the existing aqueduct routing?
So we're actually teeing off of the North Marin Aqueduct at the freeway area. So this would be our pipe, our own pipe coming off of the freeway. So there'd be a pump station pretty close to the freeway, our pump station, and then we'd be moving, I think it's a 30-inch line, 36-inch line. Yeah.
The second question or point is that there was an ill-conceived letter to the editor this Saturday, as I recall, about storage and wildfires. They were comparing Pacific Palisades to us, missing the whole point of the difference between having lakes and having tanks. And I thought that was a very unfortunate letter. I thought it just missed the boat completely. Just showed a complete misunderstanding of water storage and its role in firefighting, especially when you have lakes that basically, in terms of firefighting, have infinite capacity. I can't even imagine any fire that would be sufficient to drain any of our reservoirs, even the little ones. So I think that, that's something that our friends at the IJ have been doing a pretty good job, but I thought they really dropped the ball on that one. So just a comment.
Maybe a couple questions and comments. A lot of work's been going into the design by your team and then in engineering about in-system improvements specific to how we can move Sonoma water through the system. Would those in-system improvements allow for distribution pretty much throughout the system if we were to approve this pipeline roughly the same timeline? Are those lining up in terms of end result? Meaning if we start the pipeline now, it takes 4 years, throwing out a number, would those in-system improvements line up so we can start moving water pretty quickly?
It's certainly possible that we could look at that. So we say in-system improvements very casually, but these are significant capital cost projects, replacing sort of backbone infrastructure for us in some places. So we'd need to take a look, and maybe there's some pieces that would fall into place in terms of the timing. But we were trying to mesh all of those with capital work that we need to do as well. So it's a little bit tricky to.
No, understanding that it's probably a lot more complicated than I'm making it seem. I just want to make sure because the value goes up for the PETA 3 project quite a bit within system improvements. So having those at least moving forward is another big thing for me. And then, I think fresh out of everyone's mind is, Los Angeles fires and things like that. And what starts to rise up on the conveyance piece is really two things. One, I think it starts building a foundation for reliability for us so that we can move forward on something else later on. And I look at the Kent Reservoir here, if we have a pipe coming in as a backup piece, now from a district standpoint, I think we'd feel a lot more comfortable draining Kent if we knew we had something in place to be able to backstop us. And then the other one I think that I've been noodling on quite a bit lately is right now, 75% of our eggs are in one basket and 25% are in the other. We're lucky we have some geographic distance between some of them, but if some disaster occurs on our watershed, there's going to be a time where we're unsure if our reservoirs are okay to use for a little bit. And I think having another option to be able to draw from really starts showing value when you talk about resiliency post some sort of event. And same thing, vice versa. If we have another pipeline deflection or something fails in the Sonoma system, then we still are sustainable for a little while. And I think that starts making a lot of sense for me. But where I get concerned is that there's a challenge. I mean, are we going to be able to get the water? Is Sonoma going to be a willing partner? And I think that's the part that I think we need to really start addressing at some point too, when we're looking at a pipeline project, because the value starts changing quite a bit if we don't have those components put into place. So I support the way we've whittled it down right now. I think it's a very responsible look, but I think it also needs to be clarified that these projects aren't gone off. They are just not the priority for this point in time where we're moving forward with the capital infrastructure. And I go back to, I think, conveyance starts looking like a really solid component of a foundation that allows us to build on for the future. So with that, any other board comments? Did you remember?
I have one more. It's important to understand that because I particularly enjoyed your comments about Marin. In 1960s, the decision was the opposite, that they decided that they didn't need the aqueduct, that they didn't want that. Now, driven primarily, in my opinion, by growth, no growth. And that was the issue that was being tossed around as opposed to the water itself. But the important part to realize here is that you talk about it as conveyance, but it's more than conveyance because it is storage in a different location. The storage doesn't have to be in Marin. It just needs to be available. Now, when you limit yourself with a pipeline, and I hearken back to the negotiations with Sonoma when we increased to 14,500, 14,300 draw per year, acre feet per year, when they couldn't convey that to us. They basically made a deal that they couldn't meet, couldn't satisfy because the pipe was the limiting factor. But the issue is the ability to get the water and to keep it. Like I say, it doesn't have to be in Marin. And frankly, I don't think it should be in Marin. I think we've tapped the facilities pretty well here. I don't think it's really fair to say we haven't used Suluhuli, but the issue is it's infrequently used because of the difficulties of using it. With electrification, it becomes a little easier, but still you have the problem that Suluhuli doesn't have enough watershed to really fill it. So making it larger, unless you bring the water in from somebody else, makes very little sense to me. So, just from a mechanical standpoint, hence why I asked about Kent. I know that watershed is pretty plentiful as opposed to the other one. So the important part is not to think of it as we own it or we have it. It's just that we have access to it. That's the difference here. And the conveyance gives you that access. It's like having no way to get the car to Petaluma. And the car's not much value. Same way, you can have the water there, but you can't get it here. Same issue. So I think that we need to trim out things like the Suluhuli consideration altogether because of its impact and also because of the practicality. I think just from a pure engineering standpoint, it doesn't satisfy my assessment of what the best alternatives are.
A clarifying question on cost with PETA 3. Is there a difference between terminating that pipe at Suluhuli versus Nicasio in terms of cost?
There is, I want to say it's 3 miles.
Yeah, it varies by the alternative, but it's a few miles incremental pipe. So what we showed is phase B for PETA 3. There is a phase C, which is a relatively modest cost to add to basically branch off, so you could feed Suluhuli as well. So far, this is the first 2 phases would get you to Nicasio. So then there's a turnout and you'd go to Suluhuli. And whether it made sense to just combine it with phase B, we'd figure that out at that point. But there is that flexibility built into the approach.
But that could always be done.
Yes.
Great. Thank you for that. Any additional board comments? Great. Terry, public comment, please.
Yes, we have several. We have 8 so far. The first 3 are Phil Sauter, Annie Dulcini Mount, and Bronte Edwards.
Good evening, and thanks for the presentation. It's always good to see demand management listed at the top of water supply options that the district is considering. It's the only water supply option that retains the district's pristine water quality, can be implemented quickly, can deliver results without lengthy studies, has important components that don't require capital investments and major rate increases, and it won't require the destruction of homes and businesses in West Marin. But unlike other options being considered, there aren't any specific conservation programs or any budget for them or a timeline for creating action items. We do have a goal of saving 4 million gallons a day, but the timing for that goal is 20 years out, and we don't yet know the assumptions that will make us wait that long. Water efficiency seems like it's currently more of a placeholder and not yet able to be compared with other options. At the last regular board meeting, I requested that we look at customer data on pockets of high summer water use so that we can develop a demand management program and set a budget and choose the best options, none of which we could do without good customer data. I noted that we were scheduled to revisit the water supply program again on January 21st, which is today, and hoped we'd see customer data as a necessary step in creating demand management programs that are predictable and reliable and can be compared with other water supply options. I asked at last Tuesday's board retreat and again at Friday's operations committee meeting that now that we have brought demand management into parity with other water supply options in terms of importance, we can start looking for parity in terms of specificity of programs and budgets and timelines. But it's not yet there tonight. I recall Ben saying 2 years ago that he didn't believe conservation was either predictable or reliable. We certainly have the skills to match other water agencies, like the San Diego County Water Authority, who worked with the Homeowners Association to replace 58,000 square feet of grass in communal spaces and save 270,000 gallons annually. Or the LA Department of Water and Power, who worked with a golf course to use a different kind of turf and install a high-efficiency irrigation system, and that saved 28 million gallons a year. These projects are both predictable and reliable. So please, next time we see a water supply comparison chart, let's show some specific conservation project goals, budgets, and timelines so that demand management really can be compared with other options. I think it's the only way to make demand management predictable and reliable and remain at the top of our list. Thank you.
Thank you. Annie? After Annie is Bronte Edwards and then Maria Gisletta. Please remember to follow that order. Thank you.
Hi there. Thank you for the presentation. It was very informative. I just want to go through some of the slides and just talk about some of the thoughts that I had on each one. So reliability and sustainability, with both Kent and Suluhuli providing the same amount of acre feet per year, it was noted that the availability of the source water was good depending on rainfall. But in the case of a drought year, this would not be a viable option for water storage for the Suluhuli. The reservoir is very shallow and the water will evaporate much quicker than a deeper one such as Kent. So I just wanted to bring that to a reminder. For this flexibility and resilience, it was very clear that conveyance was a better option for the local storage or than the local storage. For the schedule and implementation, looking at the Suluhuli option between litigation and implementation of the project, 10 years seems completely unreasonable. Just seems, yeah. So the plan to also include the environmental assessment that may or may not be in your favor. I feel like once the endangered species are found to thrive in the environment, it maybe extend the amount of time longer than 10 years, perhaps. For water quality, I disagree with placing Suluhuli as a high quality. We need to remember it's inundated with mercury, and it poses a health concern to human consumption, but also the wildlife that eat the fish that live in that reservoir. Expanding the reservoir also will increase the amount of mercury in the water, so we just need to think about increasing the methylmercury concentrations that are also the primary food source for the osprey and the golden eagles and the bald eagles. And we don't know their lifespan or long-term fertility, so just something to consider. Environment, just restating that the environmental impact of the Suluhuli expansion will be extreme. It will devastate the habitat of the native and endangered species that live there, including the humans who have been stewards of that land for generations. Social stewardship. It says it disrupts the viability in existing agricultural operations. I just think we need to remember that it will devastate the farmland and terminate all the ag operations, including the animals that thrive there. And we need to remember the immense emotional stress that will put on the families to force them to leave their homes and their family history that's been part of their land for hundreds of years. So I'm running out of time, but I'll just say in conclusion, we support to the Water District's desire to increase the water supply for Marin County, but we do not support using the Suluhuli Reservoir as a solution and ask that you please take it off the table. Thank you.
Thank you. Bronte Edwards, please, and then Maria Gisletta.
All right. Good evening. My name is Bronte Edwards. I'm a chef and first-generation sheep rancher born and raised in the North Bay. I also represent a nonprofit coalition of farmers, small business owners, and community members in Sonoma and Marin counties called Communities for Food and Family Farms. I'm here tonight to ask this board to officially remove the option of the expansion of the Suluhuli Reservoir from the list of projects to build drought resilience in our region. And thank you to the board members tonight who expressed their support in this move. Last meeting, you all shared with us your selection criteria between all of these different projects. One of the priorities for this criteria was sustainability. Last year, the United Nations said that our carbon neutral farming in Marin County is a model to feed the world. Our agriculturalists in our region are literally leading the entire world in sustainable strategies to grow our food in an increasingly difficult environment to be successful in agriculture. How can we lead the world in complex issues abroad when our agricultural leaders appear to be disposable to community leaders here at home? Farms provide the community with healthy, fresh foods, biodiversity, and wildlife corridors, not to mention the carbon sequestration from grazing that more and more scientists are saying is one of the best tools we have to improve the environment and meet our climate goals. Removal of these historic farms take our community backwards in terms of sustainability. I assume many of you are also aware of the settlement of the Point Reyes Seashore and the removal of agriculture there. During our Grassroots Measure J campaign, our organization measured polling locally, and overwhelmingly in our region, community members support protecting local food and open space. The community is not happy with the continual removal and dismantling of our local food system. It is not sustainable, and it does not meet our community sustainability goals. All of that aside, and I said this last time I spoke with you all, I really do not think the community is interested in water that has presence of mercury. What does the community gain from this project moving forward? We're losing farmland, biodiversity, wildlife, local food, local culture, homes, and family legacies for water that I don't think any of us in this room would drink if it were in a glass in front of us all right now. Why are we giving all of this up when we have better options that you all have admitted tonight are better? Please listen to the community and show us you are truly committed to sustainability by removing the expansion of the Suluhuli from the project list. Thank you.
Thank you. Maria Gisletta, Jack, and then Shalina Moretta.
I'm going to cut my speech in half tonight because I appreciate the board members' comments earlier regarding the Suluhula. And they are kind of raw comments because we are, as Bronte mentioned, in kind of mourning for a tremendous loss to our friends and fellow ranchers out at Point Reyes. Throughout this process, I've kept asking myself, why has the Suluhula expansion gone so far with so many technical hurdles stacked against it? Why would you take an isolated, adequately sized reservoir with an increasingly unreliable small watershed and bump its capacity threefold? What is desirable in creating hundreds of acres of shallow, warm, turbid water that would increasingly infiltrate and evaporate, leaving a vast arid plain where some of Marin's most fertile pastures and riparian corridors once thrived? Why displace and destroy rare and fragile thriving ecosystems dense with common and protected species? For example, sprawling carpets of morning glory, a California endangered plant species, grow thick in our pastures every single summer. Why saddle yourselves with thousands of acres of extensive annual watershed maintenance, increased fire protection risk? Why would you likely increase the 100-year flood levels over adjoining public roadways? Why create a hostile takeover and destroy 100-year-old legacy ranches that house multi-generational families and employees? Ranches that fought in 1979 hard against the initial take to establish the Suluhula and lost, but were at least given the compromise to which our homes and our futures had the right to remain. Why would you not utilize lands and water rights that you already possess at Kent, where there are no homes to bulldoze to the ground and where depth of water and water quality are more favorable? Why would you break federal, state, and locally funded legally binding conservation easements that ensure these lands remain in agricultural perpetuity? Why do you continuously present slides that are mute and dismissive to the honest repercussions of the human element of our Hicks Valley community, as you have not heard our voices for 3 years? I'm going to take out a big chunk of this, but in general, I'm going to trade places with you for 10 seconds. I want you to gather in your mind's eye your home, your jobs, your possessions, your cherished memories. Take all that life's dedication and then look me in the eyes as I tell you I'm going to take it all away. Whether it makes sense, whether it's right or not. In that flash in the pan moment, you might feel our fear and sorrow, but I appreciate your comments tonight regarding taking the Sula Hula off, but this is still how we feel. Thank you.
Thank you. Jack, please, Shalina, and then Larry Menekes and Bob Middlestead.
I think it's worth reasserting that a reanalysis of what our actual supply is with regard and what our supply provides to our community with regards to years worth of water, and presuming given people are using considerably less water consistently than 20 years ago, and therefore I don't think it's accurate to still claim we have a 2-year water supply within our county, and just some reanalysis of that number is really worthwhile at this point.
Shalina, please. It's not so. Then Larry Menekes and Bob Middlestead.
Hi, I'm Shalina Morita. I'm with Communities for Food and Family Farms. We work with the community to bridge the divide between community and their farmers. We ran the No on J campaign you might have seen with the No on J cow. So we studied the polling and saw firsthand what the community wants. I'd love to sit with any of you and go over ways to strengthen rather than break down the community trust. I could have cried when I heard Dr. Mayer start talking, then each of you follow up. Thank you for hearing your important local farmers. I had to rewrite some of what I had written. I still want to know, though, what the benefit is for putting this kind of pressure on local food. We just saw what happened with Point Reyes and how the script gets flipped quickly against farmers, the same farmers that have kept this land open and beautiful. Maybe unfortunately, because it becomes an opportunity rather than an important food resource for the community. We all know that water is important. We also know that food is important. Regenerative and climate smart farming is important. The people of Marin have spoken time and time again about wanting to keep local food and farmland around. They believe in the way farmers farm here. If social stewardship is important, I'd like to see the community's perception of taking farmland and local food on that grid, not just losing grazing and farm and grassland. I understand that your job is to get water to the community, and that's a very important job. You're all very intelligent, and I'm hopeful to hear that you are not pretending that the wool is over your eyes to the other things that are important to your community as well. What will this look like in 100 years? We can't recreate farmland. California is top for fertile farmland. When you can get water without taking that farmland, why not lean into that and keep Marin a leader in the best food on earth? That sure would add to social stewardship, would it not? Work with these farmers, not always constantly against them. They're not disposable. This process has unfortunately been putting fear into these farmers and others across Marin and Sonoma for years now. Is it truly worth that impact? Why continue with that pressure? What is the real point of this? I'd like to see things like this never make it this far on the list ever again. The good thing is that it's raised awareness. The bad thing is that the process has lowered trust. A true cost-benefit analysis needs to take the community into consideration. When there are ways to get water that don't include taking away their local food, those are the ways that need to be considered first, not prioritizing ways that seize both water and land. It's not right. It feels more like greed. It's creating distrust in the community in a bigger way than you may realize. This community values local food, cultural heritage, and food sovereignty, By leaving Suluhuli on your selection list, you're showing the community that you do not respect their values.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Larry Minikis, please, and then Bob Middlestead, and then I'm jumping to Zoom, Ed Jameson.
Good evening, folks. Well, first, I want to thank our ranchers for their passion and their belief, and certainly I support removing Suluhuli. And also, keep in mind that this January looks very much like 2020 and 2021. This is a very dry January, and this process started about 5 years ago now. This is when we started, and it's moved along very well. I know there's been some who said it's gone too slow. I think it's moving along at the pace it needs to move when you're talking about complexities that are being looked at here. However, I think we're reaching a point here in this stage where the board is deferring back to staff as to what should come off the list here. And I think this should really come back to the board, and this should be a board discussion to come back to staff and suggest what should be coming off the list, that you've received enough information at this point to formally make a decision, because what's happening tonight is that there's informal discussions about pulling items off the list, and that's where it gets a little loose. And I think you can tighten it up publicly by doing this publicly and presenting it that way. And my final comment is, please plan for disasters, because we know they're going to come, and we need to be prepared, and we don't want to become short. We don't want to be shorthanded because we're trying to save a little money at the front here. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good evening, Bob Middlestead. I think the staff has done a good job in narrowing this to 4 alternatives. I think what would be really helpful, at least to me, just listening to this discussion, is for the next time to walk through the 4 options in more detail and to take into account the comments that have been raised tonight and have been raised elsewhere. I mean, with conveyance, as I look at the chart, conveyance has 5 green boxes, and so that looks like a clear leader. I'd like it to be clear whether, if you go the conveyance route, that takes all these other, that takes storage capacity expansion, dam expansion off the table. Is this a case where we just need one or the other? And then also, I think the staff can dig down deeper into questions like, is there really a prohibitive mercury problem with Suluhuli? I mean, if there is, obviously that should come off. And then I think there can be a further analysis of some of the claims made about what's grown there, the farmland, the percentages. I've talked about that before. And then let me switch to, on conveyance. So one thing I'd like to hear on conveyance too is, what can go wrong? To me, it almost sounds too good to be true. What can go wrong with that conveyance? I like the regional approach, but also if there's a big drought, do we have trouble getting the water from Sonoma? So I think that should be factored in. And then turning to raising dams, when I first started thinking about this, the statistic that I heard that really stuck in my mind was that we only capture about 10% of the water off the watershed. So 90% goes into the bay. And, it seems like such a common sense approach to, well, if we need more water, why don't we just raise the dam? But then we get into all of these other issues that we've talked about. I think the staff has tried to capture those with the reliability, evaluation factors, and other factors. And I think now they can narrow that down, focus in on it. But, with 2 weeks to go in this process, I don't think we've got enough specifics, enough drilling down to say what the right project is, or to take any of the 4 off the table for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Ed Jameson, then 1402, and Marilyn Price. Go ahead, Mr. Jameson.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. As for raising reservoirs, I believe that the 5,000 acre-foot per year yield estimate is overstated. That would be about 4,000 acre-feet a year net of evaporation. as I believe the big 2017 study estimated. This is too small an addition for the very high capital costs, and I agree that raising dams should be given no further consideration. On the size of necessary supply additions, Jacob's 8,500 acre-foot estimate of needed supply had several errors and questionable assumptions, including a 3,000 acre-foot a year decrease in stream releases that the district believes is unrealistic. I believe the correct estimate of our need is about 14,000 acre-feet a year, assuming that ongoing demand has been reduced by 3,000 acre-feet since the recent drought. Thinking about what we just went through in 2021, can it be possible that we only need 6,500 acre-feet per year of new supply to survive a 4-year drought with a mandated population increase of about 13%? I believe this just does not pass the sniff test. Thank you.
Thank you. 1402, please. 1402.
James Holmes Larkspur. James Holmes Larkspur. My concern has to do with what was referred to as, is Sonoma a willing partner? I don't think that's been established. I think that's a major issue with regard to reliability. Can we be sure that we have absolutely airtight legal access to any water? If we don't have absolutely legal airtight access to water, then the conveyance option really isn't a reliable option. Do we really have the access? Can we be assured of that access? Very little is legally airtight. Are we in danger of putting our necks in a guillotine and Sonoma can bring down the blade in case of drought or desire for revenue or something else? That is the big open question I see with conveyance, and unless it can be nailed down absolutely, and I think things legally cannot be nailed down, we would be spending an awful lot of money on something where we have a tremendous risk. I would hate to see local storage taken off the charts unless we can be absolutely positively sure that we have legally airtight access to Sonoma water. You've been hearing a great deal from a local community which would be affected, but we have to keep in mind also the interests of the much broader community which ultimately must prevail in any consideration of water supply. Thank you.
Thank you. Marilyn Price, then Eugenie Borton.
Yeah, I echo Bill's comments about demand management being such an important tool to use. I'm not an expert, but his thoughts sound quite reasonable to me, and I hear Phil mention them often at your meetings. I don't hear a reply from the board regarding his thoughts and questions. I sincerely hope you can address his comments at a future board meeting so those of us who tune in can hear your supplies. I also imagine you're looking into how other water districts are dealing with demand management, as it would be good to hear what they are doing too. The way I look at water is that it is something everybody uses and lots of people misuse every day. So many treat it like a cheap commodity and don't think about saving except when in a drought. To me, we should concentrate big time on working with our residents to learn why they should use water wisely for environmental reasons and the expense they will have to pay if we don't. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Price. Ms. Borton, please.
Yes, my name is Eugenie. I live in Dillon Beach, and I want to thank you for your presentation. I learned a lot, especially about desalination process. I'm asking you to please take Sulahul Lake. I'm not sure if Sulahul, I'm not mispronouncing it. Please take it off the table. On an emotional level, I think it's one of the most beautiful places on earth, as is. It's just gorgeous. When you don't even take into context the families, the history, the mercury, the chance of the mercury. It just doesn't make sense because it's shallow. And just please take it off the table. In the shadow of what's happened in Point Reyes this past week, just shocked and saddened. And when I heard about this, yeah, super upsetting. But I appreciate your comments. I feel a little bit more optimistic, given some of the director's comments, and I'll keep it short and sweet. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And last, we have Trish Derry, please.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, good evening. So I really am liking all that Kelly Green across the bottom of the PETA 3 conveyance. And as I live in Petaluma, I'm a farmer up here, I would support using water from this source. The system construction dates would be far less than doing one of the big reservoir alternatives. And as you do narrow your choices, please consider, which you've already heard about Marin losing 12 farms. A few others have also recently folded due to economic hardship and a lack of succession plans. 2 of those farms at the point sold their milk to Strauss Family Dairy, which our family does also, our dairy. And so when we lose a farm, it's has far more of an effect than just the footprint of the land that that farm is on. It has effects in the community, in schools, in our other agricultural suppliers. And we just can't continue to lose farms to eminent domain in circumstances that mean this constant attrition to the farmers. I'd really like to see you remove Suluhuli from further considerations for the reasons already listed by everyone else. I think the mercury, the fact that it's a shallow dam, mostly the fact of displacing these farms. We need to realize that farming is for the greater good also, just as you're doing something for the greater good, so are farmers. So I'm going to keep it brief, but I also had one question. In my life, I've seen Nicasio Dam empty twice. I've seen it bone dry where you could see the old bridges in the bottom. And I just wondered in this last time, if you needed more capacity, was there not a way to consider deepening that dam when it was empty? It was just a thought. I'd like to hear if that was ever an option or something that could be considered in the future. So thank you for your consideration, and good luck to everyone.
Thank you. There are no further speakers.
Great, thank you. And to the folks that attended tonight, thank you very much for all your comments. We appreciate it. Paul, coming out of this now, do you have guidance that you need as we head into February? We're looking for, we've got a list now that's narrowed down to the board's approval down to 4. Is there something else you need from us or any more direction moving into February?
No, I think we're good.
Okay, so we'll take a deeper dive on these 4 then next month. Okay, great. And with that, we'll move on to item B.
Good evening, board, and President Sampson. I'm Molly McLean, District Council. And we're going to talk about a few items that are not new. We have 3 of them specifically, and Adrian Mertens and I are going to take turns sort of teeing them up. I just wanted to indicate that these are 3 separate items. They can be taken in turn. We'll review them. If you want to act on them after the initial presentation, that's possible. Or if you want to wait for the presentation on all of them and then act on them in turn, that's also possible. And we'll go from there. So Adrian, would you want to start?
Sure. Adrian Mertens, Communications Public Affairs Manager, starting first with overview of the proposed modifications to board committees. So originally during the December 17th board meeting, we did receive feedback from the board on some ideas for modifications to our committee formations. The board did direct staff to add that as an item for discussion to the board retreat. And so that was taken up last Tuesday during the retreat, where we got some further feedback from the board. There's really three proposed changes. First, renaming Operations Committee to the Planning Committee. This would broaden the scope of that committee's focus, include other critical areas that aren't currently captured under the focuses of the Operations Committee. And this includes topics such as communications and outreach, as well as water efficiency. The second item is doing away with the standalone Communications and Water Efficiency Committee, with the thought being that we would fold water efficiency items into the ops or planning committee committee meetings going forward, so that they're better integrated with the overall water supply roadmap efforts and discussions. And water efficiency updates would still occur on at least a quarterly basis under this new format. And then we would fold communications committee updates into various committees, so that outreach updates could more directly align with the projects or initiatives that they're supporting. And then communications updates would also still occur on at least a quarterly basis under that new format. And then this would reduce overall committee meetings per year by 4. And then the third item is to move operations committee move the scheduling of operations committees from third Friday of each month to a Tuesday on a designated day of the month. We've determined that the fourth Tuesday of each month would work best, with a couple exceptions, which I will get to when we get to the calendar item. And so this would allow for greater participation of district staff if the meeting doesn't occur on a Friday, as Fridays are typically our regular day off or work from home day for many staff. I'll pause there.
Great, thank you. Any objection to taking these individually from the board? Okay, great. We'll go ahead and open up discussion on item number 1. Director Russell.
I'm cool with it.
Great, thank you. Director Kush.
Yeah, all good to me.
No comments.
No comments.
Great. Any public comment, Terry?
Phil, yes, we have one, Phil Sauter.
I apologize. My comments will cover both items 1 and 2. Should I wait until number 2?
Probably.
Okay, with that, I'll take a motion to approve item number 1 under B.
So moved.
Second. Roll call.
Director Mayer,
Aye.
Director Russell,
Aye.
Vice President Smith,
Aye.
Director Kush,
Aye.
and President Sampson.
Aye.
Thank you.
Next up, board discussion on item number 2.
Yes, so I'll tee this up for the discussion
Okay.
on the dual noticing practice that the board has had in place. And the discussion led us at the board retreat to continue the reexamination of that practice with some direction from the board to bring forward an item that would actually scale back the dual noticing on the Finance and Administration Committee meetings specifically. There are 3 Finance and Administration Committee meetings that would be duly noticed. Those are noted on the calendar, will be part of the next discussion, but basically those are for budget review as well as the financial fiscal year end review that seem appropriate to include the full board via a duly noticed meeting. So that's the proposal based on direction, and we can take that in turn.
Sorry, board comments. We'll start on this side. Director Mayer.
No, as I said during our retreat, I actually had a change of heart after listening to Director Russell's comments and some of the public's comments, that I was just as happy to have everything be duly noticed, because I would be there anyway, and that would allow me to be able to ask questions and whatnot. But if this is what's best for everyone, I don't think it's that big of a deal. We're talking about just a few meetings a year now, so I don't have a strong opinion.
Director Smith.
Just a clarification on the 3 meetings that we will have be dual noticed. Which are those again?
I believe those are March and April Finance and Administration Committee meeting as well as August. Is that
Marked
correct?
on the calendar.
Yeah.
Yeah, so,
Rather September.
I meant, well, that, say it more directly, I think that one thing that I recommended and I want to make sure that we do is have one of those be a staff focused human resources updated meeting that all of us attend and have the ability to comment on.
I will share, as the general manager reminded me, that we've already posted the agenda for this Finance and Administration Committee meeting as a special board meeting, also consistent with our current practice.
Right.
And that will have an HR update.
But just as an approval for this going forward in years ahead, that will be one of the subject matters, like we have discussed water efficiency and quarterly basis. I want to make sure on an annual basis that one of them would be staff focused.
Yeah, so currently HR is bringing updates, in fact, to the coming meeting this week on a quarterly basis. And in addition, in the GM's monthly report, we now have a recruitment summary.
Okay.
And this is just the calendar for this year that we'll be looking at. The practice can be reexamined at any point. We would take this as direction until there's other direction.
Dr. Kush.
Yeah, I'm in favor of trying this. I think we've had a lot of debate over the pros and cons of dual noticing. Most of it makes sense, but I would very much like to see how it works with respect to the Finance Administration Committee. If I don't think it's working well and I'm missing out, I will certainly let other board members know and ask if we have an opportunity to revisit.
Director Russell.
I'm not sure you can know that, just as a comment. Perhaps, I don't exactly know how you'd make that evaluation. When you're not there, you're not there. And my position hasn't changed. I think, especially with the inexperience of the board, it's a very risky approach. I think that as the only one here who's been here for the length of time before and after this was instituted, that there are marked improvements, in my opinion, two ways. One, you've heard me talk about this before, reducing the length of time of board meetings. People seem to blow that off here. I'm telling you, it's not an insignificant factor. The more complete the discussions can be held in the committee meetings, the better the committee meetings are and the more informed the board is. So with that said, I think you probably can see where I'm headed. But, I'm just thinking, I don't even know how to integrate this into my schedule. Some meetings you go to and some you don't. It's tricky. And I don't know that we gain anything from it. The unsaid part of this is that the planning committee is all dual noticed. So it's like, what difference does it make? If that one's all dual noticed, what do we gain from partially dual noticing the other ones? I just don't follow the logic.
Just a clarification point, watershed will continue to be dual noticed.
That's proposed, yes.
Okay. Great.
And it even more speaks to my point, I believe. I don't see what the gain is. Now we're talking about 6 meetings, or I think Jed said one time 4 meetings. And I don't, it looks like more than 4 to me, but I just don't see much value in this effort.
Right. Well, I do agree with the comment that I think we should make a decision here and be able to put this behind and allow for the calendar to be adopted for 2025. So we can all put in calendars, however technology allows us to do that. But with this, I think this is a good way to test to see if this is a sustainable option. And so I'd like to go ahead and move forward with it as proposed by staff here, including the comment from Director Smith about making sure that the ones that are dual notice for finance have done so purposefully and for a reason with that. So with that, any public comment, Terry?
Yes, Phil Sauter.
Before I start my comments, I'd like to be clear that I was not aware that these would be voted on, 1, then 2, then 3. I thought they would be voted on as a block. So my comments on number 1 don't make any sense because you've already voted on it. And I want to make sure that that's clear in the record. Okay, so when I read the agenda for tonight's meeting and saw that the board was being asked to vote to eliminate the Water Efficiency Committee and scatter its remnants to other unspecified committees, including committees that wouldn't be dual noticed and would preclude more than 2 board members from joining the discussion, it seemed that the goal was to take water efficiency from the top of the list of water supply options and sink it to the bottom where it used to be and perhaps let it die a slow death. Taking this action is certainly not in the public interest, and I'm not clear how it's in the board's interest to take the steam out of a water supply option which has been listed as a top alternative on the last 6 iterations of the water supply roadmap. I'm also not sure why the board would be asked to vote to abandon dual noticing when it has heard clearly from the only board member who experienced such a system and described specifically how and why it didn't work. Again, holding committee meetings where 3 board members are stifled and only 2 can speak is clearly not in the public interest. The only reason I've heard for voting against dual noticing is to possibly reduce the time board members spend in meetings. And even that's not likely given Director Russell's experience that show regular board meetings would get longer. A yes vote on this item 2 is clearly against the public interest, as they would be asked to ricochet around multiple meetings to get information and would not hear from a majority of the board. I think it's also against the board's interest, as subjects would have to be covered once in a 2-participant meeting and again when all 5 members are present. I understand that some board members may have found the meeting schedule to be more than they bargained for, and I'm sorry to hear that. But I think alternative remedies could be either to attend fewer dual notice meetings or, if possible, to soldier on for another 20 months and make sure that new candidates running for the board understand and are comfortable with the time commitment. I've been to 3 board meetings with which this issue has been discussed, including tonight, and I don't recall any discussion of the effect on public participation. I'd like to request the board to vote no on items 1 and 2, and it may be too late for number 1, and at least discuss the public impact of eliminating the Water Efficiency Committee and abandoning dual noticing before you bring these items back for a vote. Public impact needs to be part of the decision-making process. Not only is it bad optics to make public participation harder and less informative, especially for demand management, I think it's also bad policy for a publicly elected board. And this is not a bad policy board. It's never been a board that makes it hard for public to participate. And please don't pull the curtain with this vote. If it is too late and number 1 has already been voted on and Water Efficiency Committee disappears and gets scattered, I would at least ask in the agenda that's posted on the website to highlight any committee meeting where water efficiency is discussed in red so that we can really pick it out and see it and say, I got to be at this meeting. It's clear that I need to be at this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Marilyn Price, please.
Yeah, let me see. I had read about the Water Efficiency Committee being disbanded, I think in a message you sent to everybody. And I'll just say that this was of concern to me, as I feel that this is one of the most important issues we should delve into in a significant way in a standalone meeting. In addition, your thought of not having board members being allowed to speak at each committee meeting also concerns me, as not being able to join in the discussion lessens the value of each meeting, as it seems always best to reply while the discussion is happening and not at a later time when the same group of people are not present. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Price. There are no further speakers.
Okay, any additional board comment?
Yeah, just one. I want to be clear, and I don't know if this changes what we're voting on in your language, but the concept here is not to disband or get rid of water efficiency in any way, I believe. In fact, the plan is to have just as many meetings with just as much depth and detail that the public can participate in, and all 5 board members will be on the dais. So I believe that maybe there's a misunderstanding. I do like the idea, though, that the 4 planning meetings that we have per year that will be focused on water efficiency be overtly highlighted as water efficiency focused meetings so that the public can be really clear when those are occurring.
If I If I can respond to those things, first of all, I want to apologize to Mr. Stoddard. I misunderstood. I heard you wanted to speak to item number 2, so that's my apology to you on that. Secondly, I want to point out just what you're saying, which is the intent is not to do away with the water efficiency reporting, that's actually being integrated into the broader scope of the planning committee meetings, which will continue to be duly noticed. We can take back and consider how to appropriately note those, and we can look at that for sure. But those are the same number of reports that are being given now as the water efficiency and communications committee meetings are quarterly.
Yeah, if I could just add also to that, thank you. You know, as the chair of the Water Efficiency and Communications Committee, at least until maybe today, I at least want to reassure those that are concerned by this change that I actually see this as a way to elevate the discussion around efficiency, because I have noted that our operations meetings get better attendance, more public participation than our water efficiency meetings. And I do believe that bringing water efficiency into a more central activity or committee for the district actually increases the profile and provides greater attention rather than less. I don't know if that will, really allay everybody's concerns, but that's certainly my perception. And that's the reason I supported this move.
Excuse me, and to tee off on what you're saying, we're moving into a forum that has 12 meetings a year now instead of 4, and we have the opportunity to bring it in. I know we talk about 4 quarterly updates, but I think that's a minimum is what we're looking at here. And we have the ability now for 8 additional meetings to not purely focus on conservation, but give it an opportunity, revisit things. We don't have to wait a 3-month cycle to visit something again. We can wait for a month depending on how the agenda is set. So again, I do believe this is a stronger move for conservation. I know it might seem like it taking out of its own silo, but when you bring things together, not only do you look at it as a part of a whole, but it can also be a component of anything we're looking at when we look at the operational side of things. So with that, Terry, any additional public comment?
I didn't talk yet.
I'm sorry.
I appreciate your comments, Phil. And I can assure you, I believe I'm still the chair of the committee we're talking about. When I ran first in 2004, I ran on a position of conservation first. That hasn't changed. You've heard me talk about the Romans, and that it's this whole idea of reaching out to other watersheds is first conceived of by the Romans. When Julius Caesar was in Rome, there were 7 aqueducts feeding Rome. And interestingly enough, 1 million people only use 250,000 gallons a day. With 7 aqueducts, that's all the water they brought in. And the British picked it up, and we picked it up from the British. The LA Aqueduct, the Hetch Hetchy, they're all the same concept. You don't have enough water inside of your boundaries, so you go reach out to another watershed and bring the water in. The one thing, in Benjamin Franklin's words of waste not, want not, those words are still true today. And I will personally see to it that it maintains or gains in its position of consideration. My nonchalant answer to one was I viewed it more of a semantics change than I do as a element of its constituency. So that's why I just said, whatever you want to call it operation, want to call it planning, whatever you want to do is okay with me. I don't think it matters a whole lot. But assuming the first statement I made is still true, then I will see to it that it's moved appropriately into its level of importance.
Any additional board comments? No, no additional public comment? Okay, roll call, please.
Who made the first?
I'm sorry, motion. Thank you.
So moved.
Second.
You.
call.
Director Mayor,
Aye.
Director Russell,
No.
Vice President Smith,
Aye.
Director Kush,
Aye.
and President Sampson.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to number 3. Board of Directors Committee assignments.
Oh, the calendar.
This is actually the amended board calendar, and then a separate item will cover.
Okay,
the
I'm sorry.
assignments.
Yeah.
Thank
So
you.
now that we've figured out committee formations and got approval on the dual noticing format, we can adopt a modified 2025 board and committee meeting schedule. And so that was attached in the staff report, the proposed modified schedule, as the board did approve an original schedule in December. So to make it easier, I've highlighted the areas that are changes from when it was adopted previously. So it does note for the planning committee / board meetings, since those will be dual notice meetings, those are now on the 4th Tuesday of the month, unless otherwise noted. And you'll see there are 3 Thursday dates during the year. And that's because of some other exceptions we already had to the calendar and having to move things around and couldn't make it work on a Tuesday. So that happens in February 13th, Thursday meeting, and then again in November 13th, Thursday meeting, and then December 11th, Thursday meeting. And that's in all cases due to holidays. And then Finance and Administration Committee, no longer, all meetings are no longer dual noticed, though we have noted where they will be dual noticed. That's March 27th, April 24th, and September 25th. And then I've just made a couple notes on the back to describe why dates were moved to where they were, if it was an exception to the rule. And I'll take any questions on that.
Great. Adrian, thank you for the additional update. Any board member comments?
Just a question. Attendance at the finance meetings that are not dual noticed, you don't have to do anything. You just tune into the Zoom.
So the attendees will need to participate either in person or, per the Brown Act, because standing committees are subject to the Brown Act rules. But if you are,
You don't need 3 people.
we do not need 3 people. In fact, if any directors who are not committee members want to attend, they can come here in person, sit in the audience and watch the meeting, or they can tune in on Zoom, be in the audience and watch the meeting live. It will also continue to be recorded and posted on our website. So for any of those who are not able to watch it live via Zoom or live participation, then they can watch it, the recording after the fact. Same for the public.
But not compensated, right?
That's correct. I believe it would not be.
Okay.
Have to look at that, but yeah.
Any additional comments? Okay. Can I have a motion to approve the calendar, please?
So moved.
Second.
Any public comment?
There are none.
Roll call, please.
Director Mayor,
Aye.
Director Russell,
Aye.
Vice President Smith,
Aye.
Director Kush,
Aye.
and President Sampson.
Yes.
Thank you.
Moving on to item C, Board of Director Committee assignments. So as the president, moving forward with committee assignments for 2025, and apologies for not having a draft out, but with the change in the committee name and all that stuff, I didn't want to lead to confusion. So for 2025, the new planning committee would like to request Chair Russell to continue his participation as the committee chair for that, and Director Kush to be the vice chair for that. For the Watershed Committee, I'd like to go ahead and push Ranjiv Kush, Director Kush, as the chair, and myself as the vice chair. And then Finance and Administration would be Director Smith and Director Mayer. Moving on to other assignments, we'll start with Sonoma County Water Agency, remaining Director Smith and Director Russell on that committee. North Bay Water Reuse, Director Russell and Director Mayer. North Bay Watershed Association, Director Russell and myself. The one TAM would be myself and Director Cush. Lagunitas TAC would be Director Smith and myself, and the same two assignments, myself and Director Smith, for the Tomales Bay Foundation. Any objection to those nominations?
Nope.
Okay. Do we need a vote on that?
Yes.
I have a comment though. In 20 years on the board, this is the first time I have ever experienced having a list of the committee people. I think it was not a good practice. I think it should have been included in the board packet. I sent an email to Ben and Terry about that today or yesterday. I think it's not a good practice at all. I think it's, I understand the issue of draft and all that. It'd been better to put it out in draft, in my opinion, than not put it out at all. So it's
Understood.
not a deal breaker. It's not a big deal. It's just not a good practice.
Yeah, any other vote, we're going to see it, with a 72 hours ahead of time, or, so and 24 hours at minimum for changes. So I appreciate the comment, and I'm supportive.
Any public comment?
There are none.
Okay, can I get a motion to accept the Director Committee assignments for 2025?
So moved.
Second.
Terry, roll call.
Director Mayor,
Aye.
Director Russell,
Aye.
Vice President Smith,
Aye.
Director Cush,
Aye.
President Sampson.
Yes. Moving on to item number 10, future board and committee meetings and upcoming agenda items.
Yes, good evening. This Thursday, we'll have our Finance and Administration Committee meeting slash special meeting of the Board of Directors. Then also on Friday, January 24th is the Lagunitas Creek Technical Advisory Committee. The week, I believe, I'm sorry, on Friday, February 3rd is the Sonoma WACTAC meeting. Friday, February, I'm sorry, that shouldn't be. Oh, yeah, it is. Friday, that should be Monday, Sonoma WACTAC meeting on February 3rd. I apologize. I just noticed something was off. So yes, I apologize. So Monday, February 3rd is the Sonoma WACTAC. Friday, February 7th is the North Bay Watershed Association meeting. February 11th, we'll have the regular Board of Directors bi-monthly meeting. And then it's no longer tentative. We'll have the Planning Committee Thursday, February 13th.
And if I could, next Tuesday morning, I think we mentioned, I don't know if it got out in this detail, is our winter quarterly employee recognition event. It's going to be hosted by Operations Tuesday morning. So it's going to start at 7:30, a little early for us, kind of, but not for operations. So it's going to be a breakfast event, and there's going to be a number of kind of demonstrations and other things, including pipe tapping teams. So we're hoping as many of the board members that are available would attend.
Ben, this will be in the yard?
That's correct. Yeah.
Great.
Across the street or here?
Across the street. Yeah, I heard. Yeah, it's all planned out. As you walk in the gate, anyway, there's a lot of energy and excitement putting it together over there.
Great. Looking forward to it. Any upcoming agenda items of interest? Great. With that, we'll go ahead and convene to closed session, and then we'll reconvene once closed session is done.
And there are no comments.
Sorry. Thank you, Gary. There are no public comments. Okay, we're reconvening from closed session with no reportable action. And with that, we'll go ahead and end tonight's meeting and adjourn. Thank you.